Welcome back to SledgeHammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by someone I'm a big fan of, Shane Sheehy. How you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, man.
Hey, no problem. So for those of you that don't know, he is the co-host on the Eat the Rich podcast. You can check that out down here in the description. Before they click that link, though, Shane, what can you tell us about the Eat the Rich podcast that people might not know yet?
It's a weekly show where we do a rundown on some real life ghouls, specifically the super rich, and try to get in particular like weird stories about them, bad actors and things like that.
It's definitely a lot of fun. It's something that you can listen to as I listen to it while I'm at work. So it's something that you can enjoy while you're doing other things too. So I always have my earbuds in. I'm always listening to podcasts while I'm at work. It helps make the day go a lot faster. So thank you for speeding up my days, sir. I really appreciate it.
I'm very flattered to hear that that you like it. So
yeah, we're fans, man. So thank you very much. And for coming on the show, thank you. Like I said, I'm a big fan. When you accepted the request, when I sent you on Twitter, it meant a lot to me to hear back from you so fast. So thank you so much. I do want to talk about, we talked about Eat the Rich podcast. You got anything going on in the future you can tell us about? Any special episodes you got coming up, or?
Yeah, I think we're gonna do a fun one on Texaco tomorrow, and dive a little bit into the history of that and some very sordid people involved in that. And so I'm awfully excited about that one.
Well, for those of you, this is pre-recorded, but you can click the links down here in the description. You'll be able to listen to the Texaco episode where I have to wait until tomorrow. You guys can check it out right after this interview. So we know a little bit about what you're doing in the future tomorrow with the Texaco episode. We talked about right now with the podcast. But Shane, my friend, I want to take it back to the past and talk about what started it for you, my friend. The first horror movie you ever watched, and your first horror movie was?
Creepshow by Romero.
That's for one, what a team. Romero and King.
Unbelievable combo. I mean, the thing for me, and the reason why I remember it so clearly as a kid is that my dad was really into EC Comics when he was a kid. So he had like, I guess sometime in the 80s or 90s, they did a bunch of reprints of those. And so I had growing up, like, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, all of the different titles. And then like the sci-fi ones, like a whole bunch of them, there was like there's just little like genre type comic books where you'd open it up and there'd just be like a couple of short stories in it.
Yeah.
And they always had this kind of like weird, I don't know what the word is, sort of like campy nature to them, where like, the last panel was always, it was some kind of twist, something happened in the story, and there'd be a close up on the main character's face, and there'd be like text across it going like, egads, or gas, or whatever. Like sort of hokey. I mean, those comics were, again, when my dad was growing up in like the 40s and 50s, that's when he was reading them. And so like I grew up reading those. And so then when Creepshow came on TV, like, for me, it just like kind of immediately meshed, and it didn't like occur to me until years later. It was like, oh, this is like clearly like a sort of an homage, or like trying to go back to that idea. And I think like, because the movie is 5 stories and then it has like a little wraparound like bookend thing to it. I guess when I first watched it, I was probably like somewhere between like 8 and 10, and I would see it on TV. And so when I saw it on TV, I remember I always missed the first story. And it wasn't until, again, when I was like older and, became more interested and more like directly like, oh, I want to like watch this movie. Then I saw the first story, which is the Happy Father's Day, or I Want My Cake. I forget the actual name of it. But yeah, I mean, I remember I would like tune it in and I'd watch those stories, and, like the latter 4. And some of them like really freaked me out as a kid. And then I got to that age where I was like slightly older, and I watched them and I'm like, oh, this isn't really that scary. It's very campy and silly. Mm-hmm. And then like, as I got older, I was like, wait, no, actually some of this is pretty scary. And it's really well done horror, even though it's kind of playful and it has that kind of campy attitude to it.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I love. Honestly, I think everybody that knows me knows I'm a huge, huge fan of anthology film. I love the Creep shows. I love Tales from the Hood. Some of the newer stuff they have on Shudder. I'm a big fan of Trick or Treat, obviously another one. I think the great thing about anthologies is even if you have 1 week chapter, you can still have a fantastic film.
Right.
So,
right.
Now there's a lot to talk about with Creepshow. Like you said, there's 5 different segments, and you have the wraparound. So, which scene from all of these affected you the most?
I mean the story that's in the middle, I think it's the third one. Something to Tide You Over, right? Is the name of it. Yeah, that's the one with Ted Danson and Leslie Nielsen, which also always struck me as a kid, because as a kid I was mostly familiar with Leslie Nielsen from like the Naked Gun movies.
Yeah.
You know, and as like a weird comedic actor. And in this he plays it like super straight. He's a psychopath. And Ted Danson is a guy who's been like cheating or been having an affair with Leslie Nielsen's wife. And so there's this whole like kind of thing where he's like, oh, I'm gonna, I have her and I'm gonna take you to her. And he's like digs this hole on the beach, or he has Ted Danson dig the hole on the beach. He has this like private property, and he digs this hole, he puts him in, and then he like covers him up to his neck. And then he shows him, his wife, and Ted Danson's lover on a like a TV screen that he brings out, like an old tube TV, which is such another kind of cool like throwback. And the whole like gimmick is like, the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't want you to be able to overpower me, because Ted Danson's supposed to be like a strong guy, Leslie Nielsen's an older guy. And then of course the reveal is like, once he's covered up to his neck in sand, like he's gonna die there. Like that was the whole point. And so his wife, he's already dug down on the beach like a few miles or something, he says. And so he sees her also in the same situation, and he's watching her like drown with the water come over her. And for like the other weird thing that's never, it's like the guy Leslie Nielsen's character has like a voyeuristic like tape fetish thing or something. Something's going on, because he's like, he records the whole thing. And then when he goes back to his like elaborate mansion, there are these shots of like all of the, he's got surveillance cameras everywhere. He's like deeply paranoid, and he's got this whole like very 80s like wall of like VHS tapes or like old beta tapes. I don't even know. And so he's recording and watching live as Ted Danson is like freaking out. And there's this moment where he looks right into the camera. And so then we see like Leslie Nielsen watching him. And he goes like, I'm going to get you, Richard.
I'm going to get you. You hear me, Richard? You hear me, Richard? I'm going to get you.
And there's something about the performance. And I think as a kid, all the other stuff in the movie, right? Because there's like more kind of classical, like supernatural horror. I mean, even that story ends up with the two people who drown come back as like water zombies at the end, in a very like, again, a very like EC Comics style ending. But just like the reality of that scene is so horrifying, and on just on a psychological level, like that idea of being trapped. And if you've ever been at the beach, and I think when I was a little kid, there was one moment at the beach where I got caught in the tide, where I was like swimming, and you have that feeling where you suddenly lose control and you feel like, oh shit, I might drown, or
that dread feeling.
Yeah, exactly. That like that terror. And so, that whole like preceding scene where Ted Danson's like on the beach, and it's just his head, and he's like watching, and it's great, very simple filmmaking, but it's just great. Like, reverse shot, his POV of the tide coming in and then it washing him over him. And then, of course, that's the whole conceit, too, of the Leslie Nielsen's character. He says, like, if you hold your breath.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, that's the great, when they come back as the water zombies, and they drag him, and they're like, we dug you a hole on the beach, Richard.
Yep.
And at that point, he's like gone crazy. And that's another cool thing, too, is that there's a bunch of stuff in this movie in that, in that story, but then in some of the other stories as well, where there's like a playing with like, is this really happening, or is he just like nuts? And, it does that like canted Dutch angle thing. It like goes in on Leslie Nielsen, and he's got that great like manic expression of like, and he's like, there's like maybe even like cuckoo symbols or something. There's definitely a weird like comic book mat behind him when that happens. And then he's on the beach, And the great last line, I can hold my breath for a long time. It's such a good, like, I don't know, it's such a tight story. It's so
Yeah.
good.
And it's funny that you were bringing up that Leslie Nielsen has this fetish, because it's something I've always found really comical. When he first goes to his house, he walks in and he walks right over to his TV and he starts fidgeting with the stuff on the back. He's like, you can get so much better reception if you tighten this down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a weird, it's like, again, what's interesting is because it's harking on, like, the movie as a whole is harking or homaging these old kind of tropes and styles from like the 40s and 50s, right? These like comic book things. But the movie also is so like 80s on its own terms. And there's the technological element of it there where, like, Leslie Nielsen's supposed to be like a rich guy, he's got a private mansion. And so he's like a very like high tech business guy. And of course, at that time, what that meant was like fiddling with like AV cables or whatever. Now if you did like a modern version of it, he would live in like a smart house or something.
Right.
Yeah, but it's an interesting thing. He even like when he has the TV on the beach, he's like, he runs like a line of cable, right?
Yes.
And so it's so involved for him to do this, right? It's such a specific way to get vengeance, right? Because he could just kill them.
Right. But he made them dig their own grave.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
That's another, the subtext of that is something I've always loved. Like, you wanted to cheat on me. You wanted to be the one she cheated with. You've dug your own grave. So now I'm going to make your own grave.
Right.
That's something that I always liked about this. So when you think about Creepshow, what is the first thing that pops into your head?
I think it's got to be Stephen King as Jody Verrill. Like, that's the first image that I think of when that's in the second story, right? Where he's like he's playing like a country bumpkin who encounters
the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill.
Yeah, exactly. And just that, I mean, it's a very hokey and campy performance. And it's obviously like funny, and it's meant to be funny, and he's got these like the visions in his head when he thinks about like selling the meteor and stuff, or like, and he thinks about his dad, but just the image I think of him towards the end of the story where he's covered in all of the green fuzzy alien shit, that's like the first image that I always think of. And again, that shows like that's like a very campy story, but it is legitimately horrifying, and it is like, it's really sad at the end. I always feel bad for him.
When like you said, when he's covered in the green and he has the shotgun and he's like, please God, just let this happen. And then he blows his head off. Like, that's such a sad thing for this guy that 10 minutes ago in our time thought he was going to be, I'm not going to sell this for any less than $200. And we're thinking that things might work. Obviously, we know they're not going to, but in his mind, things are going to work out perfectly for him. And then to have it end that way for him was super, super sad. I agree. That's one of the sadder moments in this movie. So we talked about which scene affected you the most, and the first thing that pops into your head. But now I want to know, what is your favorite scene from Creepshow?
My favorite scene, I think it has to be in the crate, which is the fourth story, and that's when Hal Holbrook, who's playing like the meek,
pushover,
guy with the really like annoying and bitchy wife, and
Wilma,
and he concocts this whole weird plan to like feed her to this Arctic beast that he's discovered, and they have there, and like I think my favorite scene is the one where he's about to feed her to the beast, and he's like shaking the crate, and he's like, wake up. And he's like, what? And then that subsequent moment when nothing happens, and he's like so deflated, and she starts like hitting him with the purse, and like insulting him, and then when the beast actually does come out, and it's a great EC moment, and it's such a weird and dumb line, but I love it, where he's like, just tell him to call you Billy. To her, as the beast like rips it, and it's a great there's a bunch of great like cool like body horror effects things in there, where it's like you know, it rips into her and there's like the tear in her like her neck. So cool.
I have a good friend of mine, and we dissected this movie together on his podcast, Journey with a Cinephile. And he brought up a good point. I kind of think that the crate itself is maybe an homage to The Thing. The movie The Thing.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
You know, because you got this Arctic thing and like the writing on it. Like it's I think that was totally like an homage to The Thing. And my friend brought that up, and David from Journey with a Cinephile. And I was like, man, I've never thought of that. But that's actually really brilliant. And it's funny you bring up the crate, because I think one of my favorite scenes from the movie, we're talking about him and Wilma, the one where he imagines himself shooting her.
Oh yeah,
at a party. Yeah. And everybody starts clapping. You know, one guy's like, "Oh, hell of a shot!" You know, like that's how much he hates her and hates his life. Is he's literally imagining himself shooting her, and the people around her. And you could, the way that she acts and the way she treats people, you could legitimately imagine those people. Great shot.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And again, I think, sorry to interrupt, but I was just gonna say, continue. But like in what's so great about that story is that like the horror is not just the monster, but the horror is like this like relationship that this guy is in. And the scene you're talking about, what's so great about that, then when everybody else is like applauding, because there's even the scene just before that, like right before he imagines shooting her, when they're like all talking to, you know, at the, you know, it's like supposed to be a hoity-toity academic, like, you know, lunch party. And she's like drunk and she's like swearing and she's very coarse. And you can see everybody's like very uncomfortable. And we all have that moment. Like we all have had that moment where we've been in some kind of social situation where we're attached to somebody who's like embarrassing you or whatever. Yeah. And so it's a weirdly like relatable kind of thing. It doesn't have to necessarily be like a, you know, a romantic relationship, but you know what I'm saying? You know, just like,
you've had that drunk friend that, give me another one.
Right. And you're like, oh God, like, why did I take him to introduce him to like my parents or whatever, you know, like, and so just that on its own is like, there's a weird catharsis in the moment when again, in that fantasy moment when he shoots her and everybody applauds. You're like, we've all had that thought or that fantasy. And then of course he takes it to the actual nth degree. But
so let me ask you this: out of all, we have, like you said, we have the 5 segments in Creepshow. Which one of the segments is your favorite?
My overall favorite segment, I have to say, and I know it because I've now like mentioned pretty much all of them, but the last one, they creep up on you, the one where it's the like Wall Street business guy in his like New York penthouse, and it's supposed to be like vacuum sealed, and it's pretty much a solo performance, kind of like the Jody Verrill one, right? Yeah. It's almost entirely him, but then there are other characters, but they're like over the phone or through the door, and it's a great kind of contained you know, just set of scenes. And I think like as I got older and, you know, became more like kind of actively interested in filmmaking, I thought like that's so like well done. You know, there you learn so much about this guy just through, you know, weird little like plot dumps through like talking to people, but then the degree of paranoia in that one. And I think, you know, because I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in a very old building, and you just like, you always have bugs and you always have roaches, and like they freaked me out so much as a kid. And I think like, you know, to this day now when I go back and rewatch Creepshow, that's the one where I'm like, I'm like on all cylinders. I'm like, I'm terrified of these horrible cockroaches, but at the same time, this guy is such a piece of shit
that you're rooting for cockroaches.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And you know, like he's the kind of guy I would do an episode on Eat the Rich on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's like,
not only is he like, he's a racist. He celebrates someone committing suicide.
Yes, man, yes, yeah.
When those roaches, because I this is one of the ones, something you had spoke about earlier. Is this really happening, or is it in their heads?
Right.
This is one that I always felt like, is this just something this guy's gone crazy? Because even the guy at the door is like, oh, what? Are the bugs in?
Yeah,
He's condescending about it. Like maybe this guy's just crazy. But when they start ripping out, like coming out of his mouth and then ripping out of his chest. It's such a gnarly scene, man, but it's so much fun to look back on because they used real cockroaches. These were real cockroaches doing this. And it's even funnier because that guy is the uncle in Christmas Vacation. Like when I watch National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, every time I see that guy, I'm like, you fucking douchebag. I can't get over it. So the only one we haven't really talked about much is Father's Day, and which it's funny because, I got kids and a wife, and we have our holiday movies. Like on Christmas, we watch Gremlins. And on Father's Day, we watch Creepshow. That's my Father's Day
that's
one.
Great. That's great.
This is my cake. Where's my cake? It's Creepshow. And I love when he comes out and he's got her head on the platter. I got my cake. One thing I want to ask you about, because there are scenes in this movie, and the reason I specifically brought up Father's Day, there's a scene in this that I've, even as a child, bothered me really, really bad. When he goes out to the grave and he falls in and he just lays there. Oh shit.
That's just like what happens in the movie.
Damn. That's couldn't have planned that any better.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, he's laying there and you're watching this creep up on him and he just lays there. He doesn't try to get up. He doesn't try to move. But yet the dad is like, is he using like telekinetic powers to pull the thing and hold him down? Like, if that's me and I start to see that gravestone coming at me, I'm gonna at least try to get up.
Right.
And how is it moving when the dad's in front of him? That's just one scene that it's for the movies, I guess. That's one that always kind of bothered me a little bit. But we talked about Creepshow and how that's the first horror movie you watched. Now, Shane, I do want to go scream on you for a minute. Okay. What's your favorite scary movie? What is your favorite horror movie?
My favorite horror movie, I gotta say, and I was actually thinking about it because, Creepshow is Romero, Day of the Dead, I think is my all-time favorite one. And that's one where like I watch that like multiple times a year. Anytime I get a chance to, when somebody who hasn't seen it, I'm like, that's the one to watch. Yeah. And that scene in the middle of that one, that's where it's like Joe Pilato is the military guy and he's just like screaming for 20 minutes. I could rewatch just that scene over and over again. I absolutely love that. It's definitely it's I think I gotta say it's my favorite. Yeah.
Well, of the Deads, the Dead, Romero's, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead is one of the best franchises of all time when it comes to solid film. Especially that first three. But see, I don't mind the Diary of the Dead one. What's it called? Why can't I not think of it?
Like found footage kind of.
Yeah, the found footage one. Yeah. I own that one too. I wasn't a huge fan of the Day of the Dead remake. I did like Night. I did like Dawn, but I did have problems with I did not like in Night of the Living Dead, the 90s one, that they did end up making him a zombie at the end, Ben.
Yeah.
That really bothered me because I loved in the 68 one how, you have that dread of he made it, and they shoot him anyway.
Right, of course.
And I did love the 04 Dawn of the Dead. I thought that was...
that was probably because I was I was like a teenager when that one came out, and that was probably like the first zombie movie I saw in theaters without knowing that it was like a remake or whatever. I was just like, oh sure, I'll go see this, and I was like, oh fuck, like this is awesome.
Yes, dude, like it's such, and it's funny because I just had this conversation with a couple other people that I'm good friends with. But people were mad because zombies were running in Dawn of the Dead.
Right.
But Matt, if you watch the black and white 68 Night of the Living Dead, they're using rocks to bash open windows. The daughter uses that, the masonry spade to kill her mom. The 68, there's never been a consistent, zombies can or can't do this.
Even in the Romero movies, like from movie to movie, there's not like a consistency in like the lore or the look. But again, the thing that I really like in Day of the Dead is I think the some of the makeup stuff again, which is again, it's Savini. It's because he worked with Romero and
Right.
all the time. But that's the one where it's like in the opening, there's the guy with the jaw come out.
jaw?
And and then the tongue, and it's just such an awesome like. And again, like you were saying, like with even in Creepshow with the bugs and everything, like it's all real, right? It's practical effects, and they look fantastic. They look so good, and even the moments, especially in a movie like Creepshow where it's supposed to be like cartoony or supposed to be campy, there are moments where like you look at it and you're like, I know that that's a makeup effect. I know I'm not supposed to believe that it's like a real effect, but it looks awesome. And they were so excited to like make that and to have it on set and to do it. Like I love that kind of filmmaking. And I love those kinds of movies, which is why again, Romero obviously is just like
And I'm not one of those people that think CGI is inherently bad.
Oh, sure. Same.
Yeah, you can't, especially, I don't like a lot, but if you take a little bit of CGI and you mix it with the practical effects, it can be done so perfectly.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, like for me personally, I think the 3 best practical effects films that I've ever seen, and I will stand by this till the day I die, are Carpenter's The Thing, Nightmare on Elm Street, I think has great practical effects.
Yeah.
And my personal favorite, An American Werewolf in London.
Oh man. Okay. Yeah.
And when he's doing the werewolf transformation, like his hands stretching, and he's like,
yeah.
I love it so much. That's my favorite practical effect movie. So we always end this with the same question, my friend. We are going to bounce back to Creepshow, a movie that, if you are a fan of the horror genre, means a lot to you, I think. And I don't think I've met a person yet that didn't absolutely adore Creepshow. So what we're going to do now is rank it on a skull count. 0 skulls being the worst, 5 being the best. Now, this is not on the overall quality. I'm not asking you to be a film critic. I just want to know by what this film means to you and how it affected you when you had first seen it. What would you rank this on a scale of 0 to 5 skulls?
I think I would go for a 5. Like that. Yeah. It's a movie that, again, even though it's an homage to an earlier thing and it's very situated, right? It doesn't feel like dated. Right. Even though it's very stylized, it's dated in a good way. I don't know how to explain it again. Like when we were talking about the effects or any of the styles, right? Like if you haven't seen it before, and you go to watch it, like it still holds up. And as I get older, it holds up. As I show it to new people, right? Like who haven't seen it before, they're like, wow, this is great. Even if they don't have the context of like, those comic book things, or they're not super into like anthology films, like you watch it and you're like, it's a clear vision too, right? Like even though each story, because each one is like a different type of horror, they all fit together. It all makes sense together. And so, and then the wraparound story, which we barely talked about, which is the kid reading the comic book, and then at the end, like, killing his dad with the voodoo doll. Yes. It's such a great ending. I
think the best part of the whole wraparound is when he's like, well, they're not any different than the dirty magazines in your drawer.
Yeah.
And I think it's hilarious. I got to throw this in there. The Stephen King named his son Joe. So his son's name is Joe King. I think that is the best thing ever.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that was, he doesn't go, Joe Hill, I think he goes by now. Why can't I think it's Joseph Hill.
Okay.
But he is the kid at the beginning.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And I just love when the dad goes downstairs and he's like, that's why God made fathers.
Yeah.
Fathers. And he's got the beard. He's just like he's so nonchalant about, if I ever catch you with one of these magazines again, like, and then like you said, when he's getting him at the end, and that just like smile he has on his face as he's getting him. You're right. This is so much fun. And as a kid, like how you're talking about how it holds up, Creepshow 2, I had actually watched before Creepshow 1.
Okay.
And I still to this day am a big Creepshow 2 fan. Some of the way I feel about this film has changed a little bit. I just recently rewatched it and I did a review for it, which you guys can check out on my channel. The older I've gotten, when I was young, the raft was my favorite segment in that one. But the more, the older I've gotten, it's actually my least favorite, I think now, just because the sexual assault scene in that one really bothers me.
Mm.
You know, when she's passed out, look, you know, when you're a kid, you're like, oh, boobies. But, you know, you don't really understand how, you know, deep that is. And then you're rooting for this guy after that to make it to the shore. But now me as a father of 2 young girls, I'm like, fucking get that guy. You know? I'm rooting for the Blob, man. Like, get that guy. But out of all the creep shows, I'm not counting 3 because I was not a fan of it. Mm. In Creepshow 2, I think the hitchhiker is the scariest of anything from Creepshow 1 or 2. I think that one really, really got me as a kid. And, you know, thanks for the ride, lady. You know, that's something that always stuck with me. My favorite one from Creepshow 2 is Old Chief Woodenhead. I think that one has the deepest story. The acting that goes in that one, you know, like with the older couple and how she's like, don't trust these people. And then they give her the belongings. And she's like, you know, she even admits I was wrong about you. You know, like, I think that the imagery in that one is beautiful. The Native American imagery that they portray in that is awesome. They didn't make it obnoxious, even in the 80s when you were known for making shit over the top and obnoxious, you know, especially when it comes to race and stuff like that. They were really classy in Old Chief Woodenhead, and it's one that I'm a big fan of. But Shane, don't go anywhere, man. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you're clicking the links down here in the description, following him on social media, subscribing to the Eat the Rich podcast. I promise you, you will not regret it. Until next time, guys, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.